Hi, I'm Perry Atkinson, General Manager here at theDove. Hey, check out our other videos and check out our website at theDove.us. Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and I think there isn't one of us who hasn't heard about Coach Wooden, one of the great basketball coaches of all time. And Pat Williams, who is an interesting gentleman in his own right, in business consulting and in the sports world, wrote a book about Coach Wooden's greatest secret. And our own Steve Johnson had a chance to talk to Pat Williams about that. So let's join their conversation today.
Well, I appreciate you carving out some time to talk to us, because looking at your schedule, you're a very busy person, if not even just writing books, because this is the second book that you've really written about Coach John Wooden, isn't it?
Well, Steve, actually, it's the third. I wrote a book some years ago called How to Be Like Coach, and that got me into that topic of John Wooden. And then a couple of years ago, I wrote a book called Coach Wooden, the 7 principles that shaped his life and will change yours. And this is the third one, called Coach Wooden's Greatest Secret. And we had a wonderful time putting this book together. It has just been released, and I think it just gives us another look at the mind and the life of this remarkable athletic leader, but more importantly than that, a remarkable American who has so much to share with us, even though he passed away a few years ago.
Well, you know, I came from Arizona, so we always had this Pac-10 competition with Arizona State and University of Arizona against any of the California teams. So we saw Coach Wooden for years take what was, every 4 or 5 years, you have the complete team turn over, and yet he was consistent in being able to bring the players to do what they did the best, really. So I want to talk about the greatest secret, which almost sounds like Da Vinci Code Part 3 or something like that. But I want to ask you about the aspects, since it's subtitled The Power of a Lot of Little Things Done Well. That seems to be the key, does it not, to the secret that you found with Coach Wooden? Why don't you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, we were having dinner one night at his favorite restaurant, the Valley Inn, near his home in Encino, California. At this point, Coach Wooden probably was in his early 90s, but still sharp as a tack. And I remember sitting next to him as he was eating his clam chowder, and excuse me, and I said to him, "Coach, you've been on this earth a long time." I said, "Is there one secret of success, perhaps, that you could point out?" And in that deliberate, understated way, he said to me, "Well," he said, "the closest I could come to one secret of success would be a lot of little things done well." And as I reflected on that, Steve, I thought, boy, as they say in the Southern Baptist world, that'll preach. In my case, I thought, boy, that'll write. That could be a book someday. So it's quite a thrill, frankly, to have that book out and, in bookstores as we speak.
Yeah.
And, and really looking at that one aspect of Coach Wooden's feelings. And then when you really get into the topic, Steve, and really examine how he coached and how he taught and how he went about his life and how he did things, boy, he was on top of every detail.
Well,
left nothing to chance.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about that. So once he gave you that idea, did you start thinking yourself, what, I wonder, are those little things that he's talking about, or did he elaborate further on that?
Well, I thought immediately, and he always would tell you that story about the shoes and the socks, which he became famous for. On the first hour of practice every fall, he would instruct his players on how to put their socks on properly, and how to lace up their sneakers, and how to get the tongue adjusted, and how to tie the shoes properly, and how to smooth the socks out so that there would be no little wrinkles. And I did ask him about that once, and he said all I needed was one little wrinkle in one sock on one foot, creating a little blister, which by the end of practice on the first day could have been a big blister. And suddenly I got a key player sitting down for a month because he didn't get the socks and the shoe thing right. Anyway, Coach Wooden taught that every day, and the players would practice putting their socks on and putting their shoes on properly. And he did say, he said, as far as I can tell, he said, we never had a problem with blisters. So that's the classic story. But he was a absolute stickler for fundamentals. He never viewed himself as a coach, always a teacher. He always referred to himself as a teacher. And what do teachers do, Steve? Well, I'll tell you what they do. I think they're on top of the little things. They're not letting anything slip or slide every day. They're staying and reinforcing that things get done the right way and building a foundation. That's what good teachers do. And Coach Wooden, even though he was teaching basketball, he always viewed himself that was his classroom, and that he was there teaching the fundamentals of life, the fundamentals of the game. I mean, just absolutely a stickler for details.
Well, and that reminds me, when people have talked about the impact of him, previous players or coaches that have been with him, they talk not about what necessarily a great coach he was, but what he meant from a lifestyle example, really. And I can imagine, I mean, it sounds like when you're a stickler for small things like that, that almost sounds like you're an over-the-board taskmaster. But that really wasn't his style, was it? When he's talking about those little things, he's not talking about the unimportant things, but little important things, right?
Oh, I think so. He was certainly not a Simon Legree. But I'll tell you this, he had the respect of his players and a certain amount of fear. He could be very tough. He could be very demanding, and required these players to toe the line and stay within his foundation. He wouldn't let anything slide with him, and I don't think they really appreciated him until much later, Steve. Much later, after they became parents and they became grandparents. Then they gravitated back to John Wooden. And fortunately for them, he lived within a few months of 100. So they were able to go to his condo and spend time with him when he was in his late 70s, in his 80s, in his 90s. That doesn't happen in every case with players and coaches, but they were very fortunate to have that late in life relationship. And then they began to really appreciate what he was doing with them. And they came to the conclusion, now we get it. This was far beyond basketball, even though he was a great teacher of basketball and we had tremendous teams, but he was really teaching us how to be successful in life.
Yeah. I want our audience to know we're talking to Pat Williams, who's the author of the book, Coach Wooden's Greatest Secret, The Power of a Lot of Little Things Done Well. Now, although, Coach Wooden is on the cover of it holding a basketball, this isn't necessarily just for people who like sports, is it? I mean, you're talking about making little things that we may think are little things, like thankfulness being a habit and so on. Talk a little bit about what you've done with this book in that lifestyle mode that you were discussing that John Wooden had kind of left as a legacy.
Well, Steve, you're correct. This is far beyond a basketball book, because John Wooden is far beyond just a basketball instructor or a basketball coach. He's a life coach. So we get into a lot of different things here, about dealing with fundamentals and keeping things simple and controlling those things over which you have control. We get into some discussion about leadership and how that fits into this whole area. So yes, this is a life book, far beyond basketball. You're not going to come away with a lot of X's and O's in this book. Although I must tell you this, John Wooden's practices, they tell me, were absolutely unbelievable. So organized, so detailed, down to the last second. They were not all that long, but there was not one wasted second in those drills in practice. And Coach Wooden had those practices laid out on 3x5 cards, to the last detail. And that's how he ran them. And then he saved the cards. So if we said to him, Coach, what did you do in practice on December 15th, 1953? I mean, he'd go right to that filing cabinet and pull that card out.
Wow.
And he'd be able to show you exactly, down to the last little detail, what they did in practice that day. That's how he did his coaching. That's how he did his teaching. Quite remarkable. He was an amazing man.
From what you're saying here, I can see how people can take this book and perhaps look at it their own lives, saying, okay, what little things do I need to work on to make a larger impression? I'm also thinking of people who might be in management in some way, and they're looking at this saying, my style hasn't been as effective as I want it to be, even though I have the best intentions. What would you say to those people about what they need to be looking at to kind of get started looking at the detail without becoming obsessed with that and keeping the big picture?
Well, Steve, I think as you ask that question, the first thing that hits my mind is leadership. And you could call this book a leadership book. So I would encourage leaders, first of all, as in the case of John Wooden, the importance of having a clear vision of where you're headed and what you're trying to accomplish and what the goal is, what the mission is. And then you've got to be able to communicate that vision effectively. John Wooden was a wonderful communicator. He knew he didn't waste words. He knew exactly what had to be said, when it had to be said, and he said it with directness and force if necessary. But he was not wasting any words. And people skills are awfully important. John Wooden was not a gusher. He was not going to go out of his way to give false praise. But if a player deserved it, he was certainly there to reinforce and let that player know that he had done a good job. People skills are so important in that area. And I would encourage management leaders, to reach out to people, have a good word for them, encourage them, make sure they know that they're appreciated. Remember Henry Ford years ago said, why is it when all I want are a man's hands and I get his whole body? Well, that's what happens. We get people's whole bodies, and we have to be interested in them.
And it sounds like that John Wooden's legacy, really, you've been able to incorporate within your own leadership as well.
I've learned so much from him, and I'm so grateful that I got to spend time with him, in his last decade. One of the few people, Steve, I've ever been around that when you left him, left his presence, you wanted to be a better person. You wanted to please him. Even though I lived 3,000 miles away, I wanted him to be proud of me. He was in his 90s. I guess I was in my 60s. And, I wanted him to be proud of me and feel good about me as a human being. But as I said, when you left him, boy, it took about 3 or 4 days to come down from the high that you felt when you were with him. I don't know. Maybe there are a handful of people who have made me feel that way, but not many. Not many. He's one of the very few who just had that ability through his wisdom and through his life and through his manner that it just gave you an enormous lift.
Well, that's great. Pat Williams, Vice President of the NBA's Orlando Magic, author of the book Coach Wooden's Greatest Secret. Thanks for being with us. Appreciate it very much.
Steve, thanks for the invitation, and I hope people enjoy the book. It's in bookstores now and up on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com as well. Thanks for inviting me. Good to be with you.
Thank you.
All right, well, what an inspiring discussion. All right, coming up next, as you know, we are in the middle of, maybe towards the end of a special session, legislative session in Oregon. And we're going to Skype in Dave Daughter and find out what's going on up there in just a few moments.